Hi friend, welcome to A Water Connection, a space created to learn, connect and multiply the power of a conversation to give visibility to the water industry. I'm Jess Borges, a passionate human who believes you should increase your water curiosity. Welcome to this new episode. Today I'm joined by Pat McCafferty. Pat is the Managing Director of Yarra Valley Water, one of Australia's largest water utilities, providing water and sanitation services to more than 2 million people. He is with us today to unpack one of the most important parts of the water sector, which is a water utility. In addition to his role in Yarra Valley Water, Pat serves as the chair of Thriving Communities Partnership, board member of Water Aid Australia, and is the past chair of the Water Services Association of Australia. Pat is also a passionate advocate of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is something that I'm going to come back and ask him about that. Welcome to A Water Connection, Pat.
Good morning, Jess. Thanks for having me.
Pat, from what I could read online and briefly talk with you before we hit record, you have spent 28 years in Yarra Valley Water in different roles, and before that you were in other water utilities. So who better than you to let our listeners know what is a water utility?
Yeah, great question. So, I think there's some misconceptions out there about what a water utility actually is, but ultimately, the way I view a water utility, it's the word utility means useful, right? So it is something that provides something useful for the community. And I always like to say that, what we do is provide essential water and sanitation services to the community that look after public health and well-being. And they're absolutely fundamental services to, productivity, to human development, and I think the most essential of essential services. So clean drinking water is the foundation, and of course then treating wastewater in a responsible way and looking after the environment is the other aspect of what we do. So it's pretty important. Yeah,
that certainly is. For our listeners who are maybe not based in Victoria or even Australia, I found out everything, this part of the industry works very differently in different places. How does this part of the water industry work in Victoria that is different to other states in Australia?
Yeah, Victoria's been on a reform path for a long time in terms of, just fine-tuning the way the services are delivered to the community. So back in 1995, we used to have an integrated water utility for Melbourne, and we basically went through a separation process of separating the wholesale function to Melbourne Water. So Melbourne Water basically runs the catchments. They have the contract for the desal plant as well in terms of the interface of the desal plant that supplies water into our dams. And they also run the two major sewage treatment plants for Melbourne. So we're very fortunate in Melbourne because the heritage goes back to the 1880s when the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works was first created in response to a public health crisis. So Melbourne had boomed as a city on the back of the gold rush, very prosperous, but the human health impacts of cholera and typhoid and so forth as a consequence of that human development and people all coming together, which is really why modern water utilities were created in the first place. Was to sort of, try to manage the system to improve the quality of the drinking water that people had, but also ensure that, wastewater or sewage was treated appropriately. So the Board of Works was established then. So Melbourne Water runs those two key, what we call the wholesale assets. And then in Melbourne, we created three, what we call retail distributors. So Yarra Valley Water, originally City West Water, which is now Greater Western Water, and South East Water, each with a geographic monopoly. And what was really interesting about that, Jess, was that we were created, I guess, in a regime of what they call comparative competition, where regulators could see how well we did, our water quality, our responsiveness, our reliability, all the things that really matter to customers, our bills, how do we support people who are vulnerable, all of those sorts of things. So almost like a league ladder sort of approach to compare the performance of the utilities, which I think supercharged some really good improvements in performance. So that was sort of the regime. And the other thing that happened in Victoria was that there are a lot of very small water utilities scattered throughout the state. And at the same time, or roughly the same time, they were merged into bigger water utilities that were regional water utilities. So you can imagine Bendigo, Geelong, Ballarat, each having its own integrated water utility as well. So ultimately, I guess the main difference is that all of the water utilities are government owned. They all have skills-based boards. They're all subject to the same regime of regulation and economic regulation, and they also are all compared. So, all of our performance, both financial, customer service, environmental, etc., is all compared, transparently reported upon, and all of those sorts of things. And I think the other thing probably to say is over time, the collaboration has gotten better and better, and it's been required, right? Because we've had some huge challenges with climate change, extreme drought, population growth, and the effects of natural events, storms, floods, fires, and so forth. So so it's a really highly collaborative sector here in Victoria. But it's has those dynamics of independent economic regulation, independent environmental regulation, and so forth, which holds us all to account in a very transparent way.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then why would it separate like the whole, like the dams and the diesels on one side, and then the retailers? And I see like a comparison there to what happens with our energy providers. Like we have, let's say, Power Networks probably bringing like managing the big infrastructure, and then we have a bunch of retailers. Is that a similar model? And why did that separation happen there when it's a process that is almost continuous?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. It's not quite like energy, because what we didn't do is we didn't separate distribution. So we already run, say, like a dozen sewage treatment plants. All of the distribution infrastructure, so the water mains in the street, we run all of that. So we're not just a pure retailer. So in energy, the retailer basically does the customer interface and the billing.
Yeah, okay.
We do that, but we also run the system that delivers the product. And the main reason back in 1995 as to why the wholesale function was separated from the retail distribution function was around customer focus. So there was, I guess, a sense that there would be a greater focus on the community and on the customers as a consequence of making these retail distributors accountable for that service. And I think that's worked. And I'm probably one of the few people who can say that, because I lived through it all. So I saw what happened when I worked at Melbourne Water when it was integrated, was that a lot of the attention was on the major infrastructure, but not enough on service and on the community. And so by giving the wholesaler the pure focus on running that big infrastructure and making the retail distributors, as I said, accountable for delivering the core service, I think it definitely resulted in a much higher level of services. And so I think, when we compare especially say the Melbourne outcomes in terms of customer service, but also across the state, to national, international service comparisons, they come up very well. That's both in terms of the efficiency of the operations, the average bills, but also how quickly we respond to customers, the levels of customer satisfaction and trust in the organisations. And things like how we work in with the community and look after the vulnerable, for instance, and provide support for people who are struggling to pay their bills and so forth.
Yeah, and you think that the fact that there are like not only one utility but three, you mentioned it briefly earlier, that actually make you push a little bit harder, a little bit further, to be a little bit better every time, because you have someone that you're being compared all the time and you're all under the same regulation. Does that model help with that?
Yeah. Oh, totally. And again, having lived through it, it's probably still present, because human beings, at the end of the day, we're comparative machines. We walk around comparing all the time. But if you think about, a water utility, you don't want to be, that far south of the best performing water utility in any particular area. So if you understand that, they're achieving a great result in, say, let's say supply reliability or responsiveness to sewer blockages or something like that, you want to know why. And we're very, that's the other dynamic which is really interesting about the water sector. We're very open to sharing. So I can call, or my people in my team can call, say, South East Water, and say, look, you guys are doing really well on this. Can we come down and have a look? And absolutely, we always get the door open. So there's a real dynamic of sharing, collaboration, but still having that measure of comparison, which you can use and leverage. The other thing, really, from a regulator point of view. So if you think about the EPA that's regulating environmental performance, or if you think about the Essential Services Commission, which is regulating our economic, our bills and our services, they can use that data as well to say, have we got a good performer? Have we got a poor performer? What's the difference? How do we lift all the boats? So, again, that regime of comparative competition in the right spirit, because at the end of the day, we're all owned by the same government, the state of Victoria, but used in the right spirit can actually really elevate the entire performance of the sector. So it's sort of like a no hiding place, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. And are the systems connected in any way? Because there would be like margins, like places where is there like the border between the two, like and you would find solutions that maybe is better just to interconnect certain things. I would imagine for both drinking water and like for wastewater.
Yeah, when it comes to certainly drinking water, but wastewater as well. So we have between the retail distributors and Melbourne Water, we have interface points. And certainly, like our bulk supply agreement with Melbourne Water, this is the other thing about the separation. We're able to sort of articulate, here's what we expect in terms of water quality. Here's what we expect in terms of, sewage, transfers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because we get charged, bulk charges, usage charges. So we need to be able to monitor and manage those things. And we have an interconnected system too. So there are other things that we do where we say, look, when it comes to long-term supply planning, it's got to be together, right? So, the four of us get together and we look at a 50-year plan, the Greater Melbourne Urban Water System Strategy, to make sure that we've got enough supplies for a growing Melbourne, context of population growth, climate change, which is affecting inflows into our storages. So highly collaborative. We put joint teams in, those sorts of things. Also, if you think about water conservation, so how do we engage the entire community of Melbourne? There's no point all four of us having a different sort of approach to sort of, water conservation or promoting water efficiency. So we created the Make Every Drop campaign for Melbourne, and we put, joint funds in, and again, joint team in, marketing team to manage those things. And another really good example is digital metering. So we've been, beavering away on pilots and trials of new digital meters. But again, we've got a joint digital metering collaboration so that, the community doesn't get any, confused signals about our approach or, why we're doing it and those sorts of things. So, yeah, look, it's highly collaborative. So the way the model sort of works is we're looking for local innovation and a scale of organisation that's a bit more nimble and a bit more dynamic than if it was huge and integrated. So we can make decisions really quick. We can try things. We can fail fast. We can share, and then we keep going and progressing. The other thing I would also say, Jess, is that over time, our water supplies have become more and more integrated. So in the Millennium Drought here in Victoria, we started to build out what we call a water grid. So that interconnects now Melbourne to Geelong, for instance, Melbourne to Gippsland because of the desal plan, and certainly in the north of the state, north of the Divide, there's a lot of interconnection through rivers and so forth as well. So, as you get a water grid, you've got more flexibility for, moving water to where it's needed, particularly during, times of extreme drought and so forth. Gives you a lot more flexibility. So, again, that requires organisations to really work closely together about those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, water is a resource that doesn't know any borders between like the three utilities in Victoria, between the states, which is another thing that we're trying to dig into some other episodes of this, and between countries in other parts of the world as well. So it's a matter of us learning to talk to each other, and to make the best out of the resource that we have. More internally in Yarra Valley Water, you manage both drinking water and wastewater. Are those normally two separate parts of the business that are like just you do this and you do that, or is there also like some talking points there between those two areas?
There's a lot of integration between those two areas, but at the end of the day, so we've got these sewage treatment plants which are parked around the edges of Melbourne because the metropolitan sewage system would be inefficient and not very good economics to take the sewer system out to those far reaches. So we have local sewage treatment plants. When we manage those separately, we also actually, by the way, we also have waste to energy plant as well, where we take food waste, organic waste, and we convert that to renewable energy. But I can talk about that later. But that's one of the things about these wastewater treatment plants is that during the drought, we're actually able to start to leverage them to upgrade them to provide recycled water. to growing communities. So we've mandated recycled water for over 100,000 properties in Melbourne's north, and we're already up to, I think, 45,000 being serviced with recycled water, so a third pipe for flushing their toilets and garden irrigation, car washing, those sorts of things. But getting back to your question, we have to do the planning for growth in an integrated way.
Yep.
Obviously water and, sewage pipes are pretty important before you can actually develop a suburb. I mean, you need your roads, of course, but, you really do need to make sure that you've got water and sanitation, pretty much before everything else, before the development occurs. So we do the integrated planning in relation to that. We do manage them separately. Water quality and the way the way you need to keep a focus on ensuring that all the risks are being managed. Those sorts of things. We do hundreds of tests every week on on water quality. Those sorts of things. So we do have a separate focus on that and managing those risks. But ultimately, we like to call the whole organisation one team. We move people around as well, so we have a lot of rotations. In fact, I was rotated between about 6 different divisional manager roles before I became a general manager, and I rotated general manager roles as well. And we do that, to I guess build one team, one perspective of what the business does. And we have a very heavy focus on leadership. So we probably emphasise leadership over pure technical functional skills when it comes to putting people into positions of responsibility. So how well do they lead teams? How do they bring teams along? And those sorts of things. So there's a fair bit of what I noticed when I worked in the States was that we're a little bit different in that people from Australia are a little bit broader and can turn their hands to many different things. Whereas I found when I worked in a water utility in America, it was very, this is my bit, I'm technically proficient. And they are very deep technically proficient in a certain function, but not really familiar with, being able to move around.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether that comes from their military sort of, a lot of the engineers who go into the water sector in the States are ex-military. So I'm not sure if that's part of it or not, but that's something that I noticed. But yeah, so I think I've answered your question, hopefully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you make a good point, like in that part of like rotating. That's a very interesting approach that you guys have over there, because it's true. I mean, you can get your career, you can get really good at one thing, but you really need the broader perspective into understanding many other parts of the system. Either if you are working in a technical role in water, it would still be very useful. Or maybe some of that knowledge that you have there can also be applied to other things in a slightly different way for wastewater management as well. So I was just curious how you manage that internally. So yes, and I guess, one of the things that we have been talking about during this conversation is that it's basically an ecosystem. Like the water, the Victorian water kind of is an ecosystem where you have like your bulk suppliers and then you have the retailers. And I've seen that as well in my time, like in the industry, how different companies interact to each other. Apart from those, like we have your Melbourne Water, which supplies like the bulk water. You have the 3 utilities. Who else is in the sector? Like, who else is out there that you have to interact all the time?
Oh boy, where do I start? So, I'd start with customers. I think that we only exist because we have customers, right? And that's part of our purpose, which is to contribute to the health and well-being of our customers. And the other part of our purpose is to contribute to a brighter future for communities in the natural environment. And we take that purpose very, very seriously. And I think it's a hugely compelling purpose for anyone who wants to enter the sector. It's not for everyone, but hopefully the people who are attracted to that purpose come into the sector. But so first of all, there's customers, and how you engage with them and how you make them part of the organisation. One of the big things that we've done is in the last 10 years is conduct citizen jury processes where basically we bring, because we've got 2 million people, right, it's really hard to know exactly what they all want. Yeah. From a basic level that if you ask them, they'd say, well, keep the service the same and lower the price, or keep the price the same and increase the service. Yeah. Sort of like a natural starting point, but not very useful when you have to make all sorts of trade-off decisions about how much CapEx you're going to spend on the community's behalf and what you're going to spend that money on in terms of services and infrastructure. So the idea of the citizens' jury is to have a bunch of people who are a great demographic representation of the 2 million people, and do a very deep journey with them on all the trade-off decisions and the thinking that we're having for the next 5 years about our investments and our service levels and what the bills might look like to fund that. And basically pass over, like a jury, the decision making to them, which made me, the first time we did it, made me very, very nervous because monopolies aren't very good at that, like handing over the keys. But, we've moved from, I think, over the journey in my career from, seeing customers as sort of like, almost a parent-child sort of relationship to equals, adult to adult.
Yeah.
And they're part of it, right? So they're the main constituent. The second one, obviously, is the owner, which is represented through the state of Victoria. And there's two main elements of that. One is the Department of Environment, Energy and Climate Action, which is a new name for that department, but they have the water portfolio. So water policy, so for the Minister for Water, administering the Water Act, which is enabling powers, any changes in water policy and long-term strategy for the state. So there's a policy called Water for Victoria, which the Minister released, which the department worked on. So we're working with those folks all the time. The second element is the Department of Treasury and Finance, who are obviously interested in how we're doing financially. We pay a dividend to the state every year.
Okay.
So we are for profit. And out of that profit, we pay funds back into the state. So, monitoring, the financial performance of the organisation, our borrowings as well. So, we borrow, for our CapEx investments and those sorts of things for the long-term investments. And that's all done through Treasury Corporation Victoria. So they're the two main departments. And then there's the regulators. So clearly the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority, regulate us for our environmental performance, particularly around our wastewater treatment plants and the discharges that we have to waterways, those sorts of things, how we manage storm events. Then you've got the Essential Services Commission. So every 5 years they approve our future prices. We go through a very deep process to do that, and that's part of where the citizens' jury thing feeds in. And they regulate service and service policy. So, and they also issue that comparative report every year as well. So they hold us to account for our performance. Then there's the Department of Health, which regulates drinking water quality. So they, administering the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines or using those as the basis of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So, they're making sure that we do an annual water quality report of all the test results and any issues that we've had with, managing water quality in our system. I could keep going, but, they're probably the main ones. And then, obviously business customers and dealing with industry, land developers. So we do a lot of work with the development sector because, these are folks who are building new suburbs. We need to work in closely with them on ensuring that the infrastructure's there and paid for and those sorts of things as well. So, and the other probably key area for us is the welfare sector. So working in with, people from the welfare sector to look at our policies for supporting, as I said, the vulnerable, in society, things like, family violence policies, those sorts of things. So how do we support people who are struggling to pay their bills? So we work really closely and in tune with the welfare sector. And I think being government owned, there's a stronger probably connection there as well around that. And then, really significantly for us is First Nations. So traditional owners. So Yarra Valley Water has a footprint which really matches very closely to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So we're very connected into the traditional owners. In fact, our strategy now has honouring and healing country as a key principle for everything that we do. So, that is around how do we draw inspiration and insight from the wisdom of the traditional owners that, way before we established water utilities, were caring for country for, thousands and thousands of years and looking after it. How do we learn from that? I think a really good example there, Jess, is that we're doing some biodiversity work up at our Upper Yarra sewage treatment plant. And that's actually the site where there's some endangered species used to be, the helmeted honeyeater and the leadbeater's possum. So we've been working with Greening Australia and Zoos Victoria on how can we use the land that we have, because we have lots of land, to restore the biodiversity and hopefully recreate that biodiversity that existed before colonisation, so that those critters actually can come back and flourish. And doing that with the Narrett Rangers from the Wurundjeri, who are giving us the insights about land management and those sorts of things. So, that's really important to us as well.
Yeah,
It's a long answer, but there's so many stakeholders.
there's so many, and I think as you say, like it's kind of government, we have regulatory, we have like different parts on environmental and ecological and then biodiversity and bioconservation. So yeah, it's truly, and I think it's very important what you mentioned about the welfare and kind of the connection with communities, because we started this saying that we're an essential service, and if we're not there to kind of serve the customers that we have in any condition that they have, and especially when they're struggling, then why are we here? So yes, it's very important to just support them in that time. Cool. I made a promise when I introduced you, and it was to come back and ask you about your views on sustainable development goals. I thought that was very interesting when I read your bio. And although, water is the center of some, if not all of those goals, and it's interconnected, in most of them, sometimes it can be hard to connect them with something that we do on a day-to-day basis, or when you are more on a local, on an urban context where some of those drivers might not be as visible. What do you think is the role that urban water utilities, such as Yarra Valley Water, is in contributing towards these sustainable development goals?
Well, nice segue, Jess, from the previous point, because we do have this fundamental belief that access to essential water and sanitation services shouldn't be compromised by our customers' capacity to pay. So that's sort of like goal 6, clean water and sanitation for all, right? But when you step back and you look at all of the goals, there is something that a water utility can do in every single one of them.
Yes.
There's goals around eliminating poverty. There's goals around gender equality. So I think, for instance, if you look at gender equality, from the profile of this organisation has shifted so much, so that we're nearly 50% female leadership right across the organisation. Our board is actually 60% female representation. Our executive is 50-50. So things like that, which are super important, and obviously I think they're elevating the performance of the organisation. We're starting to look more and more like the community we actually serve, which is that's how we're going to be better at our jobs, right? When we are like that, we're more in tune. There's action on climate change and renewables. So the water sector, we're heavily affected by climate change, right? It's affecting the reliability of our water storages and rainfall and inflows. And it is also causing us a lot of issues to manage, particularly in emergency management when there's fires, floods, storm events, and of course extreme droughts. So we feel like we have a really big role to play there in being part of the solution, which is why we're Yarra Valley Water. We're on a pathway to net zero in 2025. So we're already producing a fair chunk of our own energy through renewables, mostly waste energy and solar, but continuing on that path and also piloting hydrogen. And remember, hydrogen actually, you need water and you need energy to make hydrogen. So if you can use renewable, energy and recycled water, you're actually starting to produce green hydrogen if you can do it in an economic way. So we do a report, and we actually do our annual report, which we look at all of the SDGs, and we actually talk about the actions we're taking in each. We also do an integrated profit and loss report, which is it's still an emerging field, where you look at both the costs and the benefits of everything you do using a different lens. So you look at human capital, environmental capital, social capital, for instance, and natural capital. And you look at your impacts, both good and bad, and try to monetize them, which gives you insights about where you should be spending your money and where you're not getting, great bang for buck in, or where you've got blind spots as an organisation in terms of, addressing all of those goals. So I think it's a great lens to step back and look at your overall impact, because even though we have borders around us, our impacts and what we're impacted from goes way beyond our borders. And I actually get reminded of that being on the board of WaterAid, right? So WaterAid Australia, is focused on, water and sanitation for the world's poorest, and we focus on Cambodia, PNG, and Timor-Leste. And the difference that water can make, clean water or access to water or an accessible toilet can make to people, which, sadly there are still literally, billions on the planet that don't have those services yet. So, it takes us all the way back to our core and what we're here for, and what we're here to do.
Yeah, that's what caught my attention the most. Like they were saying that you were very passionate about it, and you can see it how it translates, like in different things that Yarra Valley Water is doing at the moment. And I also read that you were like a signatory for the UN Global Compact. I had never heard about that. Can you just give us an overview of what that is?
Yeah, really, the UN Global Compact is an agreement between CEOs of organisations to commit to the SDGs. And to report on their performance against the SDGs. So, so many multinationals. Look, I don't know whether we were the first water utility or not. We certainly think we were the first Australian water utility, but maybe the first utility in the world to sign up. And we just felt like, it really aligned with our core strategy anyway and our purpose. And we'd already been talking about the SDGs and starting to unpack them. So it was just felt like a really natural thing for us to be a signatory for it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it kind of keeps you accountable and around those reports that you have to do. So yeah.
Yep.
Just to start wrapping up, Pat, what is the biggest challenge that you think that water utilities are facing at the moment? You mentioned a few, but I don't want to repeat them, so I'll let you go.
I think the biggest challenge will be, clearly it's climate change. And in the context of population growth as well. So, a much more unreliable system than we ever had. So the big slap in the face for Australian water utilities was the Millennium Drought, where, we had, a pretty significant collapse in the reliability of our systems, and desal plants were built, all around Australia to give us a climate independent source of water. But we have to keep focused on that and ensuring long-term supply, water security, water supply, and engaging the community. So I think part of that challenge is how do we bring the community along with the need for us to continue to plan for ongoing security of water supply. And I think the other challenge probably is just there's a whole digital transformation which is occurring as well, which I think provides a lot of opportunities as well if done well to improve the performance of the utilities, improve the customer experience, enhance the customer experience for the community as well. And I think that I'm quite excited by that prospect, because I think it does promise the next breakthrough in the way we deliver our services. But I think bringing the community along with everything that we do is I think also an opportunity and a challenge. People are getting bombarded with misinformation these days. And it's hard to sort of get someone's attention. So I think for me that's a pretty important element to what we do as well.
Great. Yeah, that's certainly big challenges ahead with climate change, and I think digital and technology is a good segue to just kind of get us into the next level to be able to solve those challenges that are coming through. Pat, what will be your message for young water professionals who might be listening to you right now in this episode?
I would say if you have a passion for community, if you have a passion for the environment, if you want to make a difference, the water sector is the perfect vehicle. You'll get plenty of opportunities to learn, grow, and achieve things. And it has a great prevailing collaborative culture. So it's a great place to work, and come on board.
Excellent. Is that why you work in the water industry? Because that was my last question that I'm asking everyone. Why do you work in the water industry? Is it because of all of these nice things that you just mentioned?
Yeah, look, I've had, obviously options to go elsewhere over my career, as everyone does, but I've never had a compelling reason to leave. I've always loved the work, really get great satisfaction for the people, interactions that we have in the sector. And, it does sort of, press my hot buttons, if you like, around community and customers. I've always had a passion for customer service and, those sorts of things as well. So, and, I've been very fortunate to be able to sort of, grow in my leadership in an organisation that really values culture. And that's another part of, something that really gets me out of bed in the morning, which is, how do you sustain and grow a high-performing, constructive culture where, everyone can be the best they can be.
Yeah, fantastic. Pat, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great experience to have this chat with you, to learn a lot how Yarra Valley Water sits into that ecosystem in Victoria and beyond like Victoria and beyond like the state borders as well. So it's very important for us to understand that. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're most welcome, Jess.
And
all the best.
And to you, my friend, thank you very much for tuning in and listening to this episode of Our Water Connection. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Please follow us on LinkedIn as Our Water Connection and in Twitter or X, I don't know what to say anymore, as Our Water Connect to hear all the updates and new episodes coming. Until next time.